What's up, everybody? This is Jake Wynn, public historian, and I am back with another video about some Pennsylvania coal region history. And this is going to be the second in a two-part series that looks at the 1877 Lykens mine fire, an important event in coal region history, especially in the communities on the western edge of the coal region. So this is a very important story to that history, one that's been largely forgotten over the years. So in episode 1 of this series, we looked at the Lykens mine fire itself, this devastating 6-week-long blaze that shut down the chief industrial interest and employer for the communities at the western end of Williams Valley in northern Dauphin County, especially the communities of Wiconisco and Lykens. That fire ultimately means that in the middle of one of the worst economic depressions in American history, that there was about 800 people thrown out of work, and all of the industries that supported that industry were also in really dire straits. So we looked at the events of the fire itself, how it started, how it was extinguished, and ultimately the implications for the mining interests and the colliery at Short Mountain that was impacted by this blaze. In this episode, the second episode of the series, we are going to be looking at the implications for the people of the communities of Lykens and Wiconisco and the surrounding areas as well, because they're impacted by this event. And we're going to put this into a national context as well and look at some of the events that are transpiring over the course of 1877 and just give you a little flavor of what it was like to live during one of the most turbulent years in American history. It's kind of forgotten today, but this year, 1877, has long-standing implications that actually come down to us in the 21st century as well. I think you'll see a little bit of what I mean when we get into the story, especially with the events of the summer of 1877. So if you're enjoying these videos, I hope you'll go ahead and subscribe to the channel. We've been seeing a quick jump in subscribers as we've been getting more videos like this out, and we're going to continue to post videos like this. It's, for me, a lot of fun to share these stories that I've been collecting over the last almost decade and a half, and to be able to share them with all of you is a real joy. So if you're enjoying these videos, yeah, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Let me know what you think in the comments below as well. Share your stories. I think this is a great opportunity to kind of engage with this history, especially around Pennsylvania's coal region. So hope you'll subscribe to the channel. I want to start this episode off with an event that took place just a few days before the 1877 mine fire broke out on January 1st, 1877. And it features a speaker, a gentleman named Charles H. Miller. He's a trained physician. He studied at the University of Pennsylvania. He grew up in northern Dauphin County in the 1850s and 1860s. And though he trained as a doctor, he was a bit of a writer. And so he is presenting in December of 1876 a little pamphlet that he put together documenting his childhood and his experience growing up in northern Dauphin County in the 1850s and 1860s. And so he speaks before the Lykens Harmonic and Literary Association to basically deliver a speech based upon this pamphlet that he published. And he shared in that a history of the communities that he grew up in. And he opened with these lines. The sketch that is intended to be presented to you remembers the primitive days of a town since grown into importance and position, a town largely increasing in trade and population, a town now the outlet of almost 500,000 tons of coal annually, whose location is among the richest anthracite beds in the state, whose future is the most promising, and whose present is full of prosperity. 9 days after he gave that address, the Lykens mine fire broke out in the depths of the Short Mountain slope at Bear Gap above the towns of Wiconisco and Lykens. And that fire raged out of control and put the present and the future of these communities into peril. And as we will see, this is going to have a very, very direct input and impact on the life of Dr. Charles H. Miller, who delivered those lines. So we'll get into that a little bit in the course of this video, a personal account of the story and and the impact of the Lykens mine fire. But we're also going to be seeing the story of the communities as a whole. So let's look. I shared this quote before, but I think it does give a good impression of the immediate response after the whistles blow at the short Mountain Colliery and the announcement that there is a fire in the mines. This account does give a good idea of what the atmosphere was like in those first days. This is what a local newspaper writes, quote, "The general impression is among those who understand the topography of these mines that the fire cannot be extinguished, that it must rage until it has exhausted itself for want of fuel. So strong is this conviction among the people of the neighborhood that a panic exists, seizing men in their business transactions and impelling them to the belief that their local interests have been swallowed up by the effects of the fire, which is destroying the mines, as all business there of an individual or general character, merchandising and manufacturing, is made dependent on the mining interest." And there's another account of this as well that comes from the Lykens Record newspaper, which was briefly published in the 19th century in Lykens, which is one of the most prominent mining towns in Williams Valley in northern Dauphin County. This is what they write in their columns. "A feeling of gloom and foreboding is apparent among all classes. The fire in the mines at this season of the year will prove a dire calamity to a large proportion of our citizens, who depended almost entirely upon earnings there for the necessaries of life. And what adds still more to their misfortunes, work at greatly reduced wages has been very slack for several months, but very meager pay could be realized under the most favorable circumstances." So as you see there, situation is already pretty bleak before this fire breaks out, and suddenly 800 men are going to be thrown out of work in the midst of the long depression, as it was called in 1877. It was in its fourth year, and the conditions are really, really awful economically. So even where these people are all thrown out of work, there's nowhere else for them to go. And this time period was very difficult for the working class across the coal region and the entirety of the country. Situation's already hard. This makes it so much worse for this small community of Lykens and Wiconisco. The fire is going to cause about $1 million in damage. It burns for 6 weeks. 150 of the workers at the colliery actually fight the fire, so they are going to get some payment as they are down in really awful conditions trying to fight this blaze. And then once the fire is brought under control, the decision is made to repair the damage, and that gives, again, some workers an opportunity to do that repair work. There's going to be about 100 to 150 people that are going to be employed, just a fraction of the usual workforce there, to bring the mine back into operation. That's going to take more than a year to accomplish. Things are just going to get worse before they get any better. And newspapers reported that working class families began fleeing Lykens and Wiconisco in search of work at the nearby Brookside Colliery in Tower City, Pennsylvania. That was a mine owned by the Philadelphia and Reading Coal and Iron Company. And others left the area entirely. They go to Harrisburg, they go to Philadelphia, they go to other places looking for work in search of employment. But it's very, very difficult to do that in the summer, especially of 1877, because pressure was building, and there is a lot of anger and frustration that is ultimately going to boil over in the summer of 1877. This is an account from the Chicago Tribune newspaper that describes the situation among the working people of industrialized America in 1877. This is what they wrote. "The expression of the dissatisfied working men is that, as the present pay is not enough for them and their families to subsist upon, they might as well strike for an advance and be locked out, as to continue work will only contribute so much more wealth to the unscrupulous and speculative corporations." Even some of the local people from Wiconisco Township are going to get into this frame of mind as well. And we have an incredible editorial from a writer who just calls himself working man, that is going to write in the summer of 1877 about his thoughts about what's going on in that summer of chaos in the midst of an economic depression. This is what Working Man writes. Have our manufacturers and operatives forgot that 100 years ago, our hero, George Washington, was fighting to have a free and independent nation? What caused the colonies to war with England? Was it a plot to destroy their former mode of government? Nay. It was for the protection of their own and our own industries, and from being suppressed to starvation with taxes on tea, etc. Now, what looks more like it than is what we have this day in this free land, America. The working class are suppressed to starvation in the first place. Labor is cut down to $1.25 per day, and when wages are paid 30%, deducted from their net earnings, leaving a small ratio to the family of man, wife, and 6 children. I fear, unless it comes to a change, that we will have the pleasure to do our forefathers' work over. That's revolutionary fervor that's going on in the summer of 1877. And in July, it boiled over completely. And it started on the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad in West Virginia, in the town of Martinsburg. A strike begins that is going to spread across the United States through the month of July as workers walk off the job and ultimately blocked one of the busiest rail lines in the U.S., and their resistance continues to inspire other similar actions. All over the country, strikes and protests break out, and violence begins to follow, as well as police struggle to maintain control of these communities, and ultimately National Guard units and the military is called in to put down this strike, which is going to become known as the Great Railroad Strike of 1877, though it spreads to other industries as well. And it's going to lead to many cities burning across the East Coast, including places like Pittsburgh, which suffer severe damage from fires as resistance to this strike from military forces, both corporate and government, putting down those strikes. There is going to be an enraged workforce that's going to set fire to many of the industrial interests of those communities. This also spread into Pennsylvania's coal region as well. And those strikers who were brave enough to go out and strike in the wake of events that we're going to talk about in just a second that were very local and you've probably heard of before, the Molly Maguires in the 1870s, the trials that took place. There are still those miners and railroad workers who are going to go out on strike in places like Shamokin and Scranton, and they are going to face armed local residents as well as militia forces that are going to, in several cases, open fire. There are people shot in the streets of Shamokin in July of 1877. And then in Scranton in August, there is another massacre of striking mine workers as well that takes place. And 4 people were killed in that incident, and dozens more were wounded. And these are scenes that happened all over the United States, especially the East Coast, in that summer of 1877. It ultimately was unsuccessful. The strike was crushed as the military forces are being brought in to enforce the law and bring peace by force back to these industrial and working communities. For Lykens and Wiconisco, those scenes in the summer of 1877 are not violent. Instead, it's much more about the threat of starvation and intense poverty that has taken root. And across other communities in northeastern Pennsylvania as well, there's not a lot of action that happens that summer, in part because the miners' union in places like Schuylkill County, Luzerne County is crushed by companies like the Philadelphia and Reading Coal and Iron Company. Before the summer of 1877. The union was crushed in 1875 after an attempted strike by the Working Men's Benevolent Association, the union. And that resistance had led to violence in the region, which is referred to as the second wave of Molly Maguire violence, which is then put down by force as mass arrests take place across Schuylkill, Luzerne, and Carbon counties in 1876 that are going to lead then to trials. And in the summer of 1877, a mass execution of 10 men in Pottsville and Mock Chunk that is going to really mark the beginning of the end of labor organizing and then violence that followed the crushing of the Union in 1877. So things are pretty quiet, all told, in the coal region, with a few exceptions like what you see in Shamokin and in Scranton. It's against this backdrop that the people of Lykens and Wiconisco were suffering. This is an account from the Harrisburg Telegraph. This is what they write that summer. The directors of the poor should render some assistance to the many indigent persons at Lykens and vicinity. They are unable to make a living on account of the mines being stopped and forced to make begging tours through the country to get enough to keep soul and body together. The farmers in Lykens Valley are greatly imposed upon by beggars. A meeting in Lykens was called to help the poor of their own community. This is what was discussed as reported in a local newspaper. A meeting called sometime since by the borough authorities to devise means for the relief of the poor of our town disclosed the startling fact that over 100 families in this small community were at the time destitute both of employment and the means of procuring the necessaries of life. This is a most gloomy outlook for the coming winter, and should business fail to revive, much suffering will ensue. Many express a hope that our government will take some action that will relieve the general stringency and bring back prosperity. Whether this hope is well-founded, time will show. The situation is desperate enough as you start to head into the fall of 1877 that the Short Mountain Colliery superintendent, a guy named E.C. Hanna, allowed people to pick through the mine's culm banks for coal to use in their own stoves and to sell. Normally that practice was banned, but you would have had hundreds of people out on the massive, what we call coal banks or culm banks, where coal that was discarded was left in massive piles, and people are going to go out and they're going to pick through that. That practice was normally banned during times of prosperity, but in this time of danger and destitution, it turns into they allow this practice in order for families to make some income, but also to keep warm as well. Other people in the communities turned to crime. And in 1877, there are, anywhere in Dauphin County, there are accounts of people who have been left without other options. They're relying on stealing, including stealing of food as well. This is one such account. One correspondent writes, quote, "Small thieving has been practiced hereabouts to some extent recently, the articles stolen consisting principally of food." So that is what is happening in this community. It is a time of intense suffering among many of the families, the working class families that lived in Lykens and Wiconisco at this time. Now, what's happening at the mine at this time is successfully drained of all of the millions of gallons, hundreds of millions of gallons of water that were pumped into the mine to put out the fire. That is successfully drained in November of 1877, and mining is going to resume in March of 1878. Workers went back to the mine, and it's going to go back into full operation. But for many, the damage was done. Some families leave the area, they never come back. And others, people were heavily invested in real estate, or may have been overexposed to the market, may have had loans that they couldn't repay, and people are going to lose their homes, they're going to lose their businesses, and fall on hard times. And one of those families that is going to suffer these consequences of the 1877 fire is the Miller family. And our opening speaker, Charles H. Miller, is going to be our representative of this. His father, a guy named Joseph Miller, was a former Dauphin County clerk and had significant investments in real estate in the northern part of Dauphin County, especially around Wiconisco Township. And when the fires devastated the mines, property values plummeted. As a family friend reported, quote, "Between 1877 and 1880, the fortunes of the family were swept away." And this began with the events of January 1st, 1877, and the mine fire that burned through the Short Mountain Colliery. For Charles H. Miller, as I said before, someone trained as a doctor at the University of Pennsylvania, he was writing before the outbreak of the fire. That's how he was making some money. He is going to ultimately have to return to medicine and practice medicine, something that apparently he's not particularly good at. He is unable to maintain his family in Pennsylvania. He is going to head west toward Kansas. and he is going to remain there throughout much of the 1880s, coming back and forth from Pennsylvania and Kansas. He is unsuccessful at making a medical practice work out in Kansas at this time, and he is going to be coming back in May of 1889. That he's going to make attempted return to Dauphin County. A friend in Lykens received a letter in early 1889 from Dr. Miller saying, quote, he would starve in the West and would try to work his way east. That journey for him ends in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania in early June of 1877, when a railroad worker found Dr. Charles H. Miller lying unconscious with significant blunt force trauma injuries to his skull. And he died several days later. He was riding a boxcar back from Kansas heading east and was caught in a rail yard as a result of massive train backups caused by the Johnstown flood, which actually wiped out the Pennsylvania Railroad bridges in and around the town of Johnstown, tying up rail traffic all over the East Coast. And so as he's trying to make this effort to get back east to Pennsylvania, where he grew up, he is murdered in a boxcar and found nearly dead. And his murder is never solved. The crime is never solved. And that is the sad ending for what was at one time a very promising young man. But Dr. Miller's sad story, it perfectly reflects the fate that befell many of the residents in the northern end of Dauphin County in the wake of the fire in 1877. That fire took place itself as against the backdrop of a national economic depression and turmoil and upheaval that shook the nation to its core and was one of the most violent moments in the 19th century in the United States outside of the American Civil War. It's largely forgotten today, but these events were immensely important in shaping especially industrial policy in the late 19th century, that labor unions are going to be kept at bay for the next 20 years after this event takes place. And it's not going to be until 1902 with the great coal strike in eastern Pennsylvania that is going to begin to break the dam and allow organized labor to actually have a chance to succeed. And that's a story for another time. But this is the conclusion of my short series on the Lykens mine fire of 1877. We've seen the fire, what happened, how you put out a mine fire in the 1870s, the impact of that on both the mining operations and on the communities as well, and a story of an individual who experienced this as well, whose life was forever altered by the events of January 1877. I hope you all enjoyed this video and learned a little something about some coal region history that I have been fascinated with for years and am delighted to be able to share with you all. If you do enjoy this video, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Let me know what you think in the comments section below, and be sure to check back in. We'll have more video content like this coming real soon.